All right. Today we are going to be talking about the mid-year changes. Those are going to go into effect here on June 1st. That are going to be coming out. But kind of before we jump into the GAR mid-year changes, we did want to kind of talk about one of the things that you're going to see run throughout the some of the changes here, and that's dealing with the clear cooperation policy
Mhm.
and the change that the National Association of Realtors made to the clear cooperation policy. We're not big fans of the changes, but the bottom line is it is. And so let's first kind of define what the clear cooperation policy is. And so the clear cooperation policy previously just basically said that all your listings had to be entered into the MLS within 24 hours.
Correct.
And we had a lot of well, not a lot, but there was a couple of big national brokerages that really did not want to share their listings with other agents. They wanted to keep them in-house. They wanted to do what's called PLNs, private listing networks. And so they pushed really hard, and they even got the Department of Justice on their side to say that, that this was in the best interest
Clients.
of the sellers because they can choose whether or not they want to be on the MLS or not. Now, and I'm just going to tell you what my personal feelings about that is that I feel like that is something that is wrong. Properties that are listed, I mean, we have so many different documentations and studies, tests, everything that's been done that shows that properties that are listed on the MLS sell for more money and faster, and properties sold on private listing networks sell much slower and for less money. However, for these big brokerages, they want to be able to keep, in my opinion, again, just stating how I feel, that they want to be able to keep those listings in house, and they want to be able to double in those listings. They want to be able to, list that property with one of their agents and have another one of their agents bring the buyer to it. And so it's basically pocket listings. So NAR in a effort to, I guess, concede or make some sort of concessions, they made some changes to the clear cooperation policy. And basically, what the changes are, look, you do have to enter it into the MLS, but it doesn't have to, but you don't, you have the ability to not to not market it out there into the rest of the MLS.
So
And
what it
basically other
is exemption to the IDX. So IDX is what allows Zillow, Realtor.com, everybody else pick up the listing on their site. So you have the right to click on not to enter an IDX, and therefore it will become a private listing agreement within the brokerage firm.
Yeah. Now, if you are going to list a property inside, as in a private listing, or you are going to list it and not have it be part of the, advertised and communicated out into the entire MLS, you have to, there's a completely separate disclosure that you need to do. That's one of the new things that's inside the GAR forms right now. And then, just also kind of on a side note, I want you to know that several other big, like Zillow, Redfin, several other companies kind of jumped in and said, look, if you list this property as not, if you decide to put it in, but don't share it to the general public, it will never show up on Zillow. It will never show up on Redfin and a couple of the other big brokerage sites out there. So Zillow, Trulia, that kind of stuff. If you enter it in there, even if you go and decide to make it active later on, they still won't advertise because their feeling is you chose not to expose this property to the entire marketplace from the very beginning. There is a lot of concerns about fair housing as to how it relates. And I'm not necessarily trying to get into that. I'm just saying this is kind of where we're at. Now, for us here in Georgia, if you are entering a property into Georgia MLS, that's going to be as the coming soon status. All right. And so that's going to be the change. If you would be putting it in as coming soon, it would not be visible to consumers, but it would be visible to agents, right?
And that's throughout the MLS membership. So it's not just limited to a one firm. So that's only for agents only and not out to the public or Zillow or any other big syndicate that currently publish our listings.
Now, what we don't know yet is what is because the coming soon status was already in our MLS and we were already able to put, sometimes we would see like flippers and
Mhm.
things like that would put a property in it or coming soon. Are those going to be banned from going into FMLS? I mean, going into Zillow and that kind of stuff? We don't know for sure on that.
We don't know how the
It's
algorithm is
yeah,
being
yeah,
pulled by Zillow and how they determine that factor.
yeah,
Because, Zillow for a long time has sold our own database back to us
yeah.
by, referrals and what have you. So, this is their way of controlling other brokerages from private listing, because that means datas are being lost to
Yeah.
Zillow and they can't sell us those leads as easily.
Now, I firmly believe that it is in Zillow's personal best interest to do this, but that doesn't mean that I don't necessarily agree with the idea, right? I think that anytime that we're limiting who gets to see listings and when we're treating listings like pocket listings, I don't feel like that's good for the buyer or for the seller. I think it's only good for the brokers and the agents. I think that's a bad thing personally. Now, inside FMLS, you have two statuses you can choose from. One is registered and the other is coming soon. Now, coming soon status is basically the same as the coming soon status in Georgia MLS. If you just go in and put something as registered, then you can't show the property at all. Even later on, you're not even supposed to put it inside a private listing network at that point. So I would never suggest putting something in as registered, but inside FMLS, the one that everyone's basically going to be going to is the same thing as in Georgia MLS. You're going to be able to utilize the coming soon status. Now, we intentionally made the decision that we think private listing networks are bad, and so we're not going to do them. That doesn't mean that, we have already several tools in our toolbox for those sellers that don't want to be listed in the MLS. We've listed property for professional basketball players, didn't want their property listed inside the MLS, that kind of stuff. You can list a property as a non-exclusive because we're not allowed to put non-exclusive listings
And MLS.
inside the MLSs. So we have some options there for what you want to do. You can still put things under coming soon, that kind of stuff. But we generally, and by the way, that's like a really small percentage of sellers. I think in our
I
career, we've
think
only
it's
had
like
twice.
one or
Yeah,
two.
we've only had
Yeah.
twice, and one was a domestic abuse kind of person. And so in those instances, there are some really small instances where that happens. But in our, you know, we're old. We've been in the business a long time, and so it's true. We haven't ever had to do this very often. So to me, it's definitely the exception to the rule, much more so than the rule itself. So we wanted to um, kind of preface that, I guess you'd say, with with what we're going to be kind of going into today, and that is the some of the changes that are in the GAR forms are a direct result of those changes. So, you're going to see that listed in a couple of different places. And so we just kind of wanted to highlight about that very quickly. So, we're going to go ahead and share our screen here real quick. See if I can find it. Let's see. I did have a question about, does this mean that the appraisers cannot use these listings as comps? That's going to be an appraisal rule. I don't know exactly.
Appraisal also pull
Yeah.
data from the tax record, just so you know. So if it's being sold, that record is available.
Yeah. All right. So we want to kind of jump in and start talking about, the GAR form mid-year changes here that we have going on. The ones that, there are some that are just very basic changes, such as like a lot of the brochures, the language has been changed, from compensation to broker's compensation for professional services, that kind of stuff. Not that huge big of a deal on that one right there. I want to jump over into F101. I'm sorry, probably should have been there, which is our exclusive seller brokerage engagement agreement. Because if that's not a mouthful, I don't know what is, right? All in all, not a ton of changes on here. Remember, if you want to know if something has been updated or edited, you can see at the bottom of each page, it will show what the date is. So all these will go live. These will automatically update inside your forms on June 1st. And so you can always see what is the version, the age and the version that you're necessarily looking at right now.
And just remember, once a revision has been put out, you should not be using the older version because that is a copyright violation. So once 6.1 comes along, you need to use these new forms.
But you don't have to go back and change anything that you already have.
Meaning like seller disclosure, what have you. The only time you will change a seller disclosure is there a major latent defects that y'all discover since the listing date and what have you, but everything else stays the same.
Yep. So first thing we want to talk about is exactly what we talked about. And so we're going to be going here into section C. So I got to find out where I'm at. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy here. So we're going to go down here into section. I am
just past B, so go.
Yeah.
Go.
Okay. All right. Yeah. This is Ming helping me out here, pushing me a little bit. Let's see. Oh, I'm apparently I've masked it. So C3 is really what I'm looking for. Delayed marketing. So I probably should have.
Then go up. Sorry, I didn't know which one you were looking right here.
All right, here. Here we go. Okay. So the first change is that exactly what we talked about as far as the delayed marketing. And so, this is
it though. Sorry. Let's talk about liability.
Mhm.
And I think the delay marketing's on a different one.
Okay, we're just going to keep going back and forth here until we get it.
Protection period.
Alan, if you hit Control F, it'll
Yep.
let you search for it.
Well, let me. All right, I'm going to try not to make everyone. Let's see.
Right here, there's marketing. There's C.
Yeah.
Well, that's liability of misinformation. Well, there's multiple services.
Okay, which way are you going, Ming? Because I can't work both ways.
Yep.
We're trying to make everyone.
Here's marketing. If you're looking for marketing.
I'm looking for C3.
There's only
F, delayed marketing here.
Right.
So here we are. Delayed marketing. Seller understands and acknowledges that if seller is delaying the public marketing of the property, seller may not maximize the number of offers the seller receives or the price offered to buy the property. Seller neither knowingly weighs the potential benefits or knowingly weighs the potential benefits of immediate public marketing. This is written in bold and basically says the exact same thing that I was saying, which is, look, it's a bad idea, right? If you're not going to be marketed out into the marketplace, it's going to hurt you. And so that's one of the big ones that I really do kind of, I'm glad that they put this in here. It does take care of some of the disclosure issues. It talks about if you're going to be doing, in here they call it delayed marketing, but this is a direct result
of the clear cooperation.
Yep, of the changes of clear cooperation kind of thing. The other thing here is we have in here is we have the changes as it comes to our limits on liability. As far as how liable are we in any kind of transactions, right? So I'm looking for C4. All right, I'm looking for liability. I apologize. I know I need to do the search function here. I just don't have my keyboard in the right spot. So, all right, here we are. Limits on brokers' authority and responsibility, and then brokers on limits on brokers' liability. So it still has the $100 as far as that being on there, but then they also added in here: brokers shall have no liability for providing information that later turns out to be incorrect or false, provided that we didn't know that it was false in the very beginning. So if someone tells us that this is the way it is, and we tell somebody else that, and then it turns out that that's false, we're still relaying what we knew
At the
about it.
time.
Yep. And then the other change that they've thrown in here is that this limitation of liability shall survive termination of the agreement. And so, because that just basically means that even if this agreement gets terminated, you can't then come back and say, well, the agreement's terminated, now I can come after you. No, that's not going to fly there.
So this, just remember the GAR contract is written for agents and brokers. It's to protect us, just like new construction is written for the builders.
Yep.
So GAR has every year, due to the rising of issues and feedback from agents, they have basically systematized and make sure that we're covering as much as possibly we can. There's, every transaction is different. So there's no way to predict how each transaction is going to go. But based on those transactions, the type of issue arise out of those transaction, this is why a GAR contract is so much better.
Now, these changes that we talked about as far as being on F101, also because we have the exclusive seller brokerage engagement agreement and we have the non-exclusive. The changes are the same for both forms. So this is both F101 as well as F104 that we have in there. So now we're going to jump over here now we're going to move over into F110, the exclusive buyer brokerage engagement agreement. And so in here, we kind of have some of the same things going on. We have new language in here. And so it's going to be down here into section 3. E.
You passed it.
Oh, did I?
Yep. CD.
C3, yep.
Okay.
So in here, it just basically defines the same thing that we were talking about on the exclusive seller engagement agreement. It's going to be the same thing about our limitations on liability. It's just moved over into this form here. So we have that change as well as the limit on our broker's liability down here. Same thing that we talked about. They just carrying that verbiage into both of these documents, and so that works for both F110 exclusive buyer brokerage engagement agreement as well as F116 agreement to work with a buyer as a customer. Same changes on both of them as far as the limits on broker's liability as well as all the other changes on here. Now, the document where we have probably the most number of changes is going to be in F201, our purchase and sale agreement. And these aren't necessarily huge changes. Probably the one that's going to stick out the most is that we changed the name in here.
For clear communication.
It's not going to show up real good, but like seller's monetary contribution towards buyer's closing costs at closing. So that's just to say closing costs on here. But we know that, depending on like who defines what closing cost is what, this was just a better way to say seller's monetary contribution towards buyer's closing costs at closing.
It's a mouthful.
It is a pretty big mouthful out here kind of thing. So that's probably one of the big ones in here is we have a verbiage change. Not that it's that
No, and
significant.
it's, I'm sure somebody can go down the road and say, hey, allowed by lender,
Yep.
add that on there. So, but anyways, we all know what it means, but this kind of helps, I think, in a buyer perspective and a seller perspective, what is the monetary contribution toward one party toward the other?
Now, I hope that they make this change before it actually comes out. But one thing that we have is I don't know if it's a formatting issue, but if you look at the bottom at the top of page 2, it now has our buyer and seller initials at the top of page
I
2
think it's a formatting.
and instead of the bottom of page 1. I don't know if that will get changed or if that will get wrapped up into 2026 forms, but I'm just letting you know. Don't think a lot of times we just look, okay, we just got to go through page 1. There is initials at
Right.
the top of page 2 now that we have to be able to go in and initial.
Just make
Yeah.
sure you initial them, because I know on authentic sign, sometimes in some forms, they don't always have the initial signature in the right blocks, and sometimes they kind of transpose. So just make sure you go through the form and have all initial in the right place.
All right, so we do start off under, as far as like further explanations in here. We jump right into the very first section, which is warranty. And so warranty and the examination, there are some new changes in here into this section in here. And some of it's just a verbiage change about how we are, like um how the seller is warranting that they have clear marketable title in here. But it helps to clarify what the seller has to get prepared for the in order to
Mhm.
transact the property in here. And then they've also expanded the language on the examination section in here about what has to get done as well. So really, to me, it was just more clarifying, helping to specify exactly um, that kind of stuff. Then we go to, let's see, I'm going to go on here to now we just have some of the same things that we were talking about before, with the name change of seller's monetary contribution to closing costs in here. Under, and then under, let's see, then let's go down here to section C. Sorry, I'm getting there. Here's C. And so under C, we there are some new things in here under remedies of seller. And so the big change in here under remedies of seller is they added a new paragraph in here. Not paragraph, a new sentence here. It says, unless seller has otherwise waived the seller's right to terminate due to the buyer's failure to pay earnest money,
Seller
seller
may.
at the termination of the agreement, sue the buyer for any portion of earnest money that was either not paid, returned, or insufficient funds, or payments which stopped. And this is where GAR came in. The GAR Forms Committee, I think, did a good job here. And they said, because in the past we had sometimes, and we've had it happen to us, and we've seen it happen before, where that buyer puts an offer on a property. They have to have they're supposed to have earnest money. They decide that they're going to walk away from it, but they don't, and they are still responsible to pay earnest money. And they're like, well, fine, I'm just going to stop the check. Fine, I'm just not going to pay. Fine. What this says is the seller has the right to take, in the past, there was no remedy for that.
Well, seller has the right in the past, but it was not spelled out. Technically, they can take the buyer to court and sue them based on the contract.
Yeah.
But this particular addition basically outlined, seller, this is your right. You can do it, as you always happened in the past, but it was not spelled out. So this is more clear language for the seller, and also let the buyer know, hey, don't default on this. And this is why we chase after earnest money so hard sometimes, because if we're the holder and we didn't know that the money has come in or has not been deposited or what have you, then we as a holder have to give a notice to all parties to where the buyer would make it good in 3 days. If not, then the seller has a right to terminate the contract. So agents, please understand, when we ask y'all for earnest money, it's not because we like to bug you, but because it does have a lot of remedies behind it if we don't follow proper procedure.
Yep. So the other thing is that under the rights of the broker in here, the language has been changed around a little bit, just about saying, look, the rights of the broker, the broker has the right to be paid. And really what it says, it's kind of like, it's here as well as in the instructions to the closing attorney, says, you can't close this without paying the brokerage, right? Without paying the agents. You have to pay
Terminate.
them. And so you cannot move forward on the closing and not, and if all of a sudden the buyer and seller say, you know what, let's just close this and cut these guys out of the deal. This says that can't happen, basically. So that's we're kind of happy about that one.
Well, like commercial,
Yep.
and I know this is residential, but in commercial, just so you know, if you were doing a commercial transaction, you will have to sign, the broker has to sign a waiver that they got their money before the property can close. So this is kind of quasi simo protection for residential agents on this one.
Yep. Under 4C, under delays caused by emergencies, they further clarified a little bit as far as what happens in the case of emergency. This is, a lot of this came from when, like, what is it,
That
Augusta?
hurricane, yeah.
When the tornado went through
North
Augusta
Carolina
and all that kind of
this,
stuff.
yeah.
And if you're in the middle of a transaction and everything is always time is of the essence, what can you do by when there is an emergency? What isn't that kind of stuff? And so they've just kind of clarified in there a little bit more. Like it says that, if you're already inside a state of emergency and you go forward with a real estate transaction, you can't then go back and say, well, I have to extend this because I was in a state of emergency. This basically says if were already in a state of emergency, then you can't go back and exercise an 8-day unilateral and those kind of things just because you want to on here. So, and then let's see, we're going to go under.
We're going to touch up on some items that are just what I call a pain point, just because this is actually a whole class on mid-year changes.
Right.
So we're just going to go over some of the important ones that we feel like for today's market. And if
Yeah.
y'all want to know more about mid-year changes, please attend one of our CE class where this is more thoroughly explained.
Now, under rules for interpreting this agreement, the big change here is that they added in a clause or a statement saying, notwithstanding the above, the amendatory clause in the FHA or VA exhibit shall control. Because in the past, we had some folks who said, well, that doesn't really count. And basically, this just clarifies to say that, regardless of what you have in your agreements, the amendatory clause will trump all.
Correct.
It's basically all that is really saying
Well, when
here.
you get a VA or FHA loan, that's a federal grant. So federal trumps all over state, over anything else.
Yep. So those are the big changes here.
We do have one new form, I believe.
Well, I mean, hold on just one second. So this goes for F201 purchase and sale, as well as lot purchase and sale, as well as land purchase and sale, new construction purchase and sale, option agreement. All those are covered underneath that. We do want to jump in really quickly to F259 because there are some small changes to F259 on here. Not really what I would consider huge changes.
It's just a name change, buyer broker compensation exhibit.
Well, they're really, they changed the name, but also they reversed A and B from, I don't know why, but just to make it confusing, what was B is now A, and what was B is now, I mean, like A is now B. And so now it says compensation paid by seller to buyer's broker, or the old school way, which is compensation shared by seller's broker with buyer's broker. So it can, just notice that they moved that, the order of A and B. The only other change that they made on here is now down here, it's got initials instead of, it just has buyer initials instead of actually signatures now. So, but other than that, those are, basically the big changes that we have on those forms. I'm sure we're going to start teaching these classes, that kind of stuff, but these are all the stop sharing here. So those are the big changes on here about how it impacts us and those kind of changes. But all in all, not necessarily the most big deal on here kind of thing.
It's not.
So
and once again, if y'all want to know more about the mid-year changes in detail, some of the things I'm sure was very insightful for you guys because you probably don't look at it every day. attend one of our mid-year change class, which will be coming out soon
Yep.
to be taught.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'd be surprised if Dana wasn't already teaching some mid-year changes on here kind of thing. So, does anybody have any kind of questions about the guard contracts, mid-year changes, anything that we kind of talked about that we can, Neil, I mean, what was your take here?
Well, here's my thoughts, because a lot of stuff that comes up, just like how you started off with talking about the whole, the large
Clear cooperation.
brokerages trying to keep the listings themselves, all these kind of things. A lot of that stuff, it frustrates me, and you can allow it to get under your skin. But I think what we have to stay focused on with situations like that, with situations like the changes they make to GAR forms, there's some years there's changes you think, oh yeah, that makes sense, we need to do that. Some you're like, why did they do that? That's just adding confusion, like the last form, the 259. So, but what I've tried to do, and I try to encourage other people to do, focus on your business. I mean, jump through whatever hoops they put out there. Do what you got to do to get where you're going, and take that energy that we would spend in frustration and aggravation and anxiety, and just focus on doing better in our own business. And that takes care of a lot of problems, because we can't affect a lot of these changes. As stupid as they may seem, how they got the Department of Justice to think that it's in a seller's best interest for the world to not know their house is for sale in only one office. That is insane, but I can't explain it and I can't change it. But I can focus on what affects our business. And that's what every agent needs to do. I know I've got a couple agents on here that's in our firm, and they actually focus on their business. They work on their business and they get business. I've got people that never show up on these Monday meetings, and they very seldom do anything. And that's okay if that's what they want to do. But I just think we have to look at how can we change our world, because we can't change the world out there. I mean, there's little things we can do to impact it, but focus on what's going to bring you success.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, most of the time, a lot of the changes are due to somebody getting sued.
Yep.
And sometimes I feel like the knee-jerk reaction is not necessarily always the best way. I know that we do try and account for every single contingency, which is why our forms are 17 pages long in some instances, right? But I think that I like them so much better, and I feel so much more positive about them than I do necessarily RE forms. Some of those are still from 2012.
Actually, they just update all the forms
Oh,
this
okay.
year.
Oh, okay. Well, then,
So with the guard changes, RE did update a form, but how much update? I really don't know. It just said revision 2025. I haven't compared side by side, each one of those forms, what the changes are yet. But I will tell you that they update most of them to combat with some of the issues that the Realtor NAR ruling, just so that we're kind of somewhat in the same page. But the verbiage and the language is still different, and their escrow holder is kind of a little jacked still.
and one of the interesting things is that the rules changes that came out from the clear cooperation policy changes, that's not actually anything to do with GAR or even GREC. It changes the MLSs. And so like this applies whether you're a realtor or a real estate professional, because it's about impacting how it impacts the MLS, not necessarily just a realtor
Well,
only
and the
issue.
seller's right to not have it advertised in MLS. And normally when I have agent ask me, say they really don't want an MLS because of, A, B, C, D, F, G, whatever it is. I said, then you probably want to do a non-exclusive, or you haven't signed some type of waiver not to be an MLS. So, but once again, we all understand that when we don't advertise to the mass, it's like telling someone the news. It's like telling the news to your cousin versus telling your whole entire family what's going on. And there's a difference in exposure and of course gossip and rumors. But anyways, and anyway, or hype, whatever you want to call it. But there's a difference between mass marketing and the better chance of hitting that one buyer that wants this particular home.
And we're really glad to see so many folks on here, just because I know that this is not
It's
necessarily
encouraging.
the most exciting topic to go about, but this shows that you're a professional, you're staying up on everything that's happening in our industry and wanting to know how the forms work. I want to tell you thank you very much for coming out today, because that's important. And even though it is kind of I don't know, nitpicky. I don't know if that's the right word to put, but
You think it's-
detailed. Yeah.
You think it's nitpicky until it happens to you, and then you're like, oh, that's why the language is there for. It really, the guard contract is set up to protect the broker and its agent. But even with that said, there's only so much protection. You do have to read the form and understand it. If you don't, please contact any of the brokers, and well, you should be contact your broker, because they're the one who hold your E&O. So
I want to say that, all of you that are on here that are licensed in Georgia, you are very, very blessed. We are very blessed to have GAR forms. I don't know about Alabama. You guys are licensed in Alabama, Ellen and me. I'm not, but I am licensed in North Carolina and Florida. And it's night and day. I mean, it is so hard. And I'm like maybe not the highest intelligent person out there, but I'm not at the bottom of the totem pole either.
Yeah.
And when I do a North Carolina contract, I struggle and I hate it. And I was trying to terminate one. I had to call the other agent and ask him how to terminate. I said, I've got the termination form, but they were so specific on what you can terminate for. It was crazy.
It's hard to believe, but Georgia's cutting edge, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
well, honestly, some of the state are using Georgia's form as a guide for their own form
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
write up, because some state didn't even have buyer brokerage agreement.
Yeah, up until a year ago.
Yeah,
But the GAR forms really are. I mean, there's never going to be a perfect form, but I feel like it does the best job of any of the forms I've seen from other states on clarity. If you read it, now people that don't read it, yeah, it's foggy. It's kind of like the Bible. You don't read it, well, yeah, you don't know what it says. But
you just
with
leave a
any,
paragraph out, a whole chapter. Yeah,
yeah,
pick and choose, right? So anyway, anybody have any question at this time? We'll love to entertain answering. If you have any ambiguity about the form or what it means. Any comments, recommendation? You guys are quiet this
Yeah, very
morning.
quiet.
Hey, good
very
morning.
quiet.
Good morning.
Hey,
Good morning.
David.
Good morning. Hey, when do these changes roll out? I'm not sure if I missed that. If y'all mentioned
June
it.
1st,
Awesome. Thank you.
6/1.
Perfect.
Yep.
Perfect.
We normally have 2 revisions a year. We'll have normally the
First of the year.
the first of the year. That's the big one normally, and then we have kind of like a little cleanup mid-year, and that's what we're looking at here, kind of thing.
Because we do have people that are grammar Nazis on the GAR form. They'll say, hey, this, the to and by, this whole different meaning, and they're right.
Yep.
So any difficulty you guys are facing right now, just with the form, or
Was there anything that we can help you guys with at all?
yeah. No.
And the hush falls over the crowd.
Wow.
Look how
Okay.
clear we were.
Okay. But like I said, this is actually a 3-hour C class. We just highlight the area that we thought that apply to
Made the
every day.
most. We wanted to,
everyday
make the most of
practice.
your time, that kind of thing. So, all right. Well, then, if nobody has anything else, we will shoot out of here. If you need us, please call, text, smoke signals. We will be glad
We're
to
here to
help in
support
any
you.
way. So we love y'all. Thanks, guys.
Take
Thank
care.
y'all.
Bye.